It is necessary for the recording of sound to convert the sound waves to corresponding changes in light. The sound waves produced by my voice are transmitted through the air to the microphone, where these sound waves are converted to changes in an electric current. These variations in the electric current are then amplified and used to control the light. This varying beam of light falling on the photoelectric cell produces variations in the electric current, which are directly proportional to the variations in the light beam. The sound track. As the varying electrical current in the photoelectric cell is small, a vacuum tube amplifier is required to increase it to the point where it will operate a loudspeaker. Sound track.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. In this episode, I am joined by Lisa. What is going on, Lisa? How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Very good, very good.
Awesome.
Yes, very excited to be doing another topic with you. I've
Absolutely.
Definitely been enjoying covering topics with you, especially kind of in the direction that we've been going. Very informational, just very interesting, eye-opening.
Yeah, learning a lot for sure.
Oh, yeah. And I know we have mentioned it before. I don't know if it's out on shows that are out yet. It might have been on a live, maybe that I took down, that it was just live for like the fans and listeners who catch it. Pretty much like this one. This live, it is live right now. It will probably be up for a day or two, and then it will be coming down, and it will just re-drop when the episode drops. But in previous episodes, I know I have said that you're coming across saints. Saints of the church that, in my opinion, they were occultists. They were mystics. Some of them, even were called a mystic or an occultist or an alchemist.
Right. Yeah.
So I did find it interesting that they were saints, that they have been considered saints. And in this episode, I think we'll probably get to covering 2 each. We'll probably end up getting about 4 done. There was plenty more that we could definitely touch on, but I just think in time permitting and not dragging this out for too long, so it's easier for people to listen to in a shorter format, I think we'll get to 4 of them today. And I guess I'll probably just get it going now, actually. One thing I do want to add real quick before we get into this, going forward, I just want to say that this show basically is our research, our intellectual property, the Occult Rejects intellectual property, and it will never be behind a paywall. People are allowed to, if they like, they can reshare this, they can post it up on anything else, they can put it out as their own. If they want to share it, the information is free, but it shall not be put behind a paywall. If there is a paywall, there is a problem. I do not want the money, so it either will have to come down or be dropped for free. The Occult Rejects are now an entity, and this is my intellectual property and will always remain free. So with that being said, now I'll get into it, and this is strictly for informational purposes. I am not trying to make money off of this either. This is free for anybody who can access the information. The first saint that I wanted to get into was Hildegard of, I'm probably going to screw up the name, Bingen. I don't even know how you even say the name. And I thought she was a very, very interesting woman. Kind of seemed a little bit like a badass in some ways. I don't know if she lived today, would she be like one of those feminists that we're just tired of fucking seeing on social media and on TV? I don't know, but she was definitely a woman with some, balls, even though she didn't have any.
I think they were built differently back then, for sure.
There was a lot of things I just thought she did that I was like, that took some guts and some, she had lack of fear, I guess, and passion in what she was doing. She is also known as Saint Hildegard or Sibyl of the Rhine. She was a German Benedictine abbess and polymath. She was a writer, a composer, a philosopher, a mystic, a visionary, and as a medical writer and a practitioner during the High Middle Ages. She is one of the best-known composers of sacred monophony. Oh, wait. Monophony? Or monophony?
Yeah, I think you said it right.
I had it in my head how to... When I was checking the notes yesterday, I was like, I knew exactly how I was going to say that word. And it's totally slipped me now. And I'll be getting into what that is. She's best known for composers of that, as well as most recorded in modern history. She has been considered by scholars to be the founder of scientific natural history in Germany. Now that phony, whatever, however you say this word, is the simplest of musical textures consisting of a melody or a tune, typically sung by a single singer or played by a single instrument player, example like a flute, without accompanying harmony or chords. Many folk song and traditional songs are like that. A melody is also considered to be monophonic if a group of singers or a choir sing the same melody together at unison, which is the same time, same pitch, or with the same melody notes duplicated at the octave, such as when men and women sing together. Or if you have any Iron Maiden fans out there, that's exactly what the guitar players do. They play in different octaves and harmonize with each other. Same thing they're saying right here. In the early Middle Ages, their earliest Christian songs called plain chant, a well-known example would be Gregorian chants, were considered monophonic. So she is known for that. So I thought that was interesting. Hildegard's covenant elected her a magistra, mother superior, in 1136. She founded the monasteries of Rupertsberg in 1150 and Eibingen in 1165. Hildegard wrote theological, botanical, and medicinal works, as well as letters, hymns, and antiphons for the liturgy. She wrote poems and supervised miniature illuminations in the Rupertsberg manuscript of her first work, Scivias, which I will be getting into. There are more surviving chants by Hildegard than by any other composer from the entire Middle Ages, and she is one of the few known composers to have written both the music and the words. One of her works, the Ordo Virtutum, is an early example of liturgical drama and arguably the oldest surviving morality play. She is noted for the invention of constructed language known as lingua ignota. Although the history of her formal canonization is complicated, regional calendars of the Roman Catholic Church have listed her as a saint for centuries. On the 10th of May in 2012, Pope Benedict XVI extended the liturgical cult of Hildegard to the entire Catholic Church in a process known as equivalent canonization.
Wow.
On the 7th of October 2012, he named her a Doctor of the Church in recognition of her holiness of life and the originality of her teaching. She had visions connected with illnesses, maybe migraines, from a young age. And in 1106, her parents sent her to a 400-year-old Benedictine monastery that had only recently added a section for women. They put her under the care of the noblewoman and resident there named Judah, Jutta, calling Hildegard the family's tithe to God. Yeah. Judah, whom Hildegard later referred to as an unlearned woman, taught Hildegard to read and write. Judah became the abbess of the convent, which attracted other young women of noble background. In that time, convents were often places of learning, a welcome home to women who had intellectual gifts. Hildegard, as was true of many other women in the convents at the time, learned Latin, read scriptures, and had access to many religious and philosophical books. Those who have traced the influence of ideas in her writings find that Hildegard must have read quite extensively. Part of the Benedictine rule required study, and Hildegard, I think, definitely took advantage of the opportunity.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
I think she
For
realized
sure.
what was around her, and she started hitting the books.
Yeah.
When Judah died in 1136, Hildegard was elected unanimously as the new abbess, rather than continue as part of a double house, a monastery with units for men and women. Hildegard in 1148 decided, screw that. I'm moving to the convert. I'm moving the convert to Rupertsberg, where it was on its own and not directly under the supervision of a male house. Now, I mean, some ways I kind of, give her credit for that. She, or as it was, I question, was it just a way to distance yourself? So maybe like what you're trying to teach would not have been censored as much.
Right. Exactly.
Now, regardless if that was good or bad, I don't know. But maybe it was in a positive way where it's like, I can, maybe be more open.
Right.
Who knows?
Yeah.
And this gave Hildegard considerable freedom as an administrator, and she traveled frequently in Germany and France. The Rupertsberg convent grew to as many as 50 women and became a popular burial site for the wealthy of the area. The women who joined the convent were of wealthy backgrounds, and the convent did not discourage them from maintaining something of their lifestyle. Hildegard withstood criticism of this practice, obviously, and she was claiming that wearing jewelry to worship God was honoring God, not practicing selfishness. That was her rebuttal, I guess. She later also, this is what I find interesting, though, and it seems like time and time again, you're always getting rich people seem to be interested in people who have very different or progressive ideas of spirituality or religion or occultism. They flock to those people.
Yeah, they do. That's interesting. You bring that up. That's true.
Part of the Benedictine rule is labor, and Hildegard spent early years in nursing and at Rupertsberg in illustrating or illuminating manuscripts. She hid her early visions for a while. Only after she was elected abbess did she receive a vision that she said clarified her knowledge of the psaltery, the evangelists, and the volumes of the Old and New Testament. So there's visions that I think that she claims that she had that she says explains I guess the Bible to her in a certain way. And that is even another thing I do find interesting. In my opinion, and I've said this myself, when you have a magical experience, it's as if you shut off the lights, you close your eyes, and a movie screen popped on inside your brain. And you're going to get visions in some sort of way, believe it or not. You're going to see stuff. And I have always said that I do think there are certain commonalities that will happen when you have this experience. Is that how these people's visions get judged as true? Because there's certain markers to look for that has a common experience. I wonder, how do these people's visions get considered true or not?
Yeah. I think
some
they also
saints
have
are
to
saints
test
because of their visions.
That's exactly it. They have to prove that they had some sort of ecstasy or visual encounter, mystical experience in order to qualify to even start the process for sainthood or canonization.
Hildegard lived at a time when within the Benedictine movement, they stressed on the inner experience, personal meditation, and immediate relationship with God and visions. So, that's even something at that time. They were stressing even these things. Hildegard, through her many letters to the German Emperor Frederick Barbarossa and the Archbishop of Maine, she wrote to such luminaries as King Henry II of England and his wife Eleanor of Aquitaine. So, she was even contacting a lot of people. She also corresponded with many individuals of low and high estate who wanted her advice or prayers. So that's even another reason why I was mentioning those people. She was talking to them because they were looking for neither advice or prayers that they could use from her.
Wow.
A final famous incident happened near the end of Hildegard's life. When she was in her 80s, she allowed a nobleman who had been excommunicated to be buried at the convent, seeing that he had last rites. She claimed she received word from God allowing the burial, but her superiors intervened and ordered the body exhumed. Hildegard defied the authorities by hiding the grave, and the authorities excommunicated the entire convent community.
Way to be a rebel.
Most insultingly to Hildegard, the interdict prohibited the community from singing. That was like their punishment now.
Oh my God.
And she was huge into that.
Yeah.
She
Well, they hit her where it hurts.
Yeah. She complied with the interdict, avoiding singing in communion, but did not comply with the command to exhume the corpse. She never handed it over. Hildegard appealed the decision to yet a higher church authorities and had won. So she stands her ground and said, "Screw you guys, you ain't getting the body," and won. I just find that funny.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Hildegard was not initially canonized by the Roman Catholic Church as a saint, although she was honored locally as a saint. I went through all of that already. She died, on September 17th. I find that interesting, the 17th. In 1179 at the age of 82. And her feast day is September 17th as well. I got some more stuff here. And I was going to get into kind of like the Scivias. The best-known writing of Hildegard of Bingen is a trilogy. It's from 1141 to 1152, I guess she wrote it, including Scivias Liber Vitae Meritorum, the Book of Life and Merits, and Liber Divinorum Operum, a Book of Divine Works. These include records of her visions, which a lot were apocalyptic, and her explanations of scripture and salvation history. She also wrote plays, poetry, and music, and many of her hymns and song cycles are recorded today. She even wrote on medicine and nature, and it's important to note that Hildegard, as for many in the medieval times, theology, medicine, music, and similar topics were united. They were not separate spheres of knowledge. And I think that is something huge.
Crazy?
Especially,
I do too.
Especially going forward with things that we're going to eventually cover and get into. That right there, I mean, it's quite obvious that all this stuff used to be looked as a collective to get an idea of what's reality or what's spirituality, what's God, what's creation. It was never split apart.
Even in academia, the colleges of different subject matters do not speak. They don't talk to each other.
And that causes a problem, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. On purpose, I think.
Yeah. Hildegard's works include 3 great volumes of visionary theology, a variety of musical compositions for the use in the liturgy, as well as the musical morality play Ordo Virtutum. I'm even saying that right. One of the largest bodies of letters to survive from the Middle Ages. Addressed to correspondences ranging from popes to emperors to abbots and abbesses, and including records of many of the sermons she preached in the 1160s and the 1170s. 2 volumes of material, natural medicine and cures. There's an invented language, like I mentioned before, called the Lingua Ignota that she has, and various minor works, including a gospel commentary and 2 works of hagiography, which I'm not exactly sure what that is. Yeah.
Writing the saints. I think it's a biography of the saints.
Yeah. She began journaling visions she had, which is basically the basis for the Scivias that we're going to get into. The Scivias was Hildegard's first major visionary work and one of the biggest milestones in her life. Perceiving a divine command to write down what you see and hear, Hildegard began to record and interpret her visionary experiences. In total, 26 visionary experiences were captured in this compilation. Sorry,
Wow.
I'm cracking up with what Dang just said.
I saw that too. I
Swear-
thought that was
He's like, yeah, she sounds crazy, and she's the one for me.
yeah, exactly.
Scivias is structured into 3 parts of unequal length. The first part has 6 visions and chronicles the order of God's creation, the creation and fall of Adam and Eve, the structure of the universe, described as the shape of an egg, the relationship between body and soul, God's relationship to his people through the synagogue, and the choirs of angels. So that's what she was writing about in that. The second part has 7 visions which describe the order of redemption. The coming of Christ the Redeemer, the Trinity, the Church as the bride of the Christ and mother of the faithful in baptism and confirmation, the orders of the Church, Christ's sacrifice on the cross and the Eucharist, and the fight against the devil. Finally, the third part, and that is consistent of 3 visions, basically goes over the history of salvation told in the first 2 parts, symbolized as a building adorned with various allegorical figures and virtues. It concludes with the Symphony of Heaven, an early version of Hildegard's musical compositions. In early 1148, a commission was sent to, by the Pope from Dissen-Badenberg to find out more about Hildegard and her writings. The commission found that the visions were authentic and returned to the Pope with a portion of the Scivias. Portions of the uncompleted work were read aloud to Pope Eugenius III at the Synod of Trier in 1148, after which he sent Hildegard a letter with his blessing.
Wow.
Towards the end of her life, Hildegard commissioned a richly decorated manuscript of Scivias. Although the original has been lost since its evacuation due to Dresden for safekeeping in 1945, its images, which is unfortunate in some ways, are preserved in a hand-painted facsimile from the 1920s. So basically, what I'm going to be showing is kind of like remakes of the original. But, let's hope that they're pretty much on point. Hildegard tackled the moral life in the form of dramatic confrontations between the virtues and the vices. The virtues and the vices go along with the Kabbalistic tree. Each sphere has a virtue and a vice.
Oh, wow.
It's even said like that, and a lot of people will say that in Kabbalistic writings, magicians. So I even find that's interesting that she
Like
writes on the
dualism?
virtues and the vices. Yeah, the good and the bad of each sphere.
Wow.
She had already explored this area in her musical morality play Ordo Virtutum, and the Book of the Rewards of Life takes up that play's characteristic themes. Each vice, although ultimately depicted as ugly and grotesque, nevertheless offers alluring, seductive speeches that attempt to entice the unwary soul into their clutches. Standing in our defense, however, are the sober voices of the virtues, powerfully confronting every vicious deception. Hildegard's last and grandest visionary work had its roots from a few times she experienced something like ecstatic loss of consciousness. As she described in an autobiographical passage included in her Vita, sometime in about 1163 she received an extraordinary mystical vision in which she was revealed the sprinkling drops of sweet rain that John the Evangelist experienced when he wrote, "In the beginning was the Word." Hildegard perceived this word was the key to the work of God, of which humankind is the pinnacle. The 10 visions of his work, the 10 visions of this work's 3 parts are cosmic in scale, to illustrate various ways of understanding the relationship between God and his creation. Often the relationship is established by grand, allegorical, female figures representing divine love, caritas, or wisdom, sapientia, I'm saying that right, The first vision opens the work with poetic and visionary images swirling about to characterize God's dynamic activity within the scope of his work within the history of salvation. The remaining 3 visions of the first part introduce the image of a human being standing astride the spheres that make up the universe and detail the intricate relationships between the human as microcosm and the universe as macrocosm. In part 2, it goes back to the opening of Genesis and forms an extended commentary on the 7 days of creation of the world told in Genesis 1, 2, 3. The commentary interprets each day of creation in 3 ways: literal, cosmological, allegorical, or ecclesiastical. I can't even say that word. Yeah. And moral or tropological, related to the soul's growth in the virtue. So, I mean, like, she's even saying that this lady, in my opinion, is at least admitting, or her work is admitted to, like, this stuff is archetypes.
Right.
You know, there is archetypes in this art. So maybe not everything is always as it, you know, people take it.
Right.
You know, maybe it's not actually like a real person. Maybe a person's just being used to try to make a point or an idea, you know. The final vision contains Hildegard's longest and most detailed prophetic program of the life of the church from her own days of womanish weakness through the coming and ultimate downfall of the Antichrist. But here I did want to show, as you can see, I did want to show like just what it looked like in some of the writing. This is from the Scivius. Even got this in here. I found this interesting.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's
But
really
here
cool.
are some of the art that I think, you know, I think it's interesting, and not to jinx myself, but you know, I had already spoken to Megan and Mario from 7 Degrees, and then not that we can go through all of them, but we are going to try to cover these, actually.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, the 3 of us. Yeah, we're going to go through some of her work. Because, I mean, like, let's be real. This
That's
one on the
amazing.
right, I mean, looks very close to something I've seen into the Toth Darrow deck. You know, some of this stuff is very interesting to me, some of her artwork.
Wow.
I mean, I think it's very occult. Very, very occult. I mean, I'm not even going to try to go through all this stuff and point out what I think she's showing. But, you know, just do want to, for the people who are able to watch, you know, here is some of the art. Amazing stuff.
She's an amazing artist, aside from everything else.
And now we are on to you.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I
So-
think it was going to take that long.
No, that's okay. I liked it. It was really good. She is a badass. Totally. So I did Saint Cyprian of Antioch. Cyprian was known by the title of the Magician and considered one of the most famous of the ancient Christian magicians. I didn't even know there was a category of Christian magicians, but he is the famous of them. Cyprian of Antioch was educated early on in his youth. He applied himself and traveled abroad. Cyprian was well known as a magician and sorcerer of Antioch, so much that many stories were written about him in books of the Occidental countries of the West, or Oriental countries of the East, Christian traditions. During his childhood, his parents dedicated him to the service of Apollo and given over to magicians at the age of 7 to study sorcery and demonic wisdom. By the age of 10, his parents sent him to Mount Olympus, and he studied the diabolical arts to prepare him for a career in sorcery. So he did like mastering demonic transformations, learned about how to change the nature of air, like bringing up winds, produce thunder and rain, disturb waves of the sea, damage landscape, send diseases, you know, all kinds of ruinous wisdom. Good stuff. There on the mountain, he engaged in a strict 40-day fast of only acorns from oak trees after the sun had set and nothing more. I will say most of these people who have visions, they engage in this crazy fasting. I mean, just intense, crazy fasting.
I mean, there's the, like I had mentioned with the Abramelin, I mean, you're kind of almost doing that prior to it. You know,
Yeah.
there is rituals to come in contact with your holy guardian angel, or just very supposedly powerful rituals or very detailed ones. A lot of them include kind of pretty much fasting prior.
That's crazy. Wow. So it's allowed him to learn the invocation and witness numberless legion of demons, the prince of darkness at the head, some standing before him, others who served him, others cried out in praise, and others who were sent to the world to corrupt people. This was at 10. At 15, he began to receive lessons from 7 great sorcerers, of whom he learned many demonic secrets. He went to Argos first, served Juno, and learned practices of deception. Then he went to Tauropolis in Greece, served Diana, and then on to Sparta, where he learned to call forth the dead from graves and force them to speak. At 20, he went to Memphis, Egypt, and learned greater incantations and charms. And then finally at 30, he went to the Chaldeans and learned astrology. There he finished with his studies. He went back to Antioch and becomes this renowned sorcerer, magician, destroyer of souls, and great friend of the Prince of Hell. Talk about a resume. I put that the title.
Destroyer of souls.
Destroyer of souls, yeah. Apparently, he testified that he conversed with the Prince of Darkness face to face often, in so much that the Prince of Darkness praised him before everyone and said that he gave him a legion of demons to serve him. I think there was like a legend that said that he was so evil that even the devil cast out Cyprianus because of how evil he was. I don't know how true that is, but it sounds good.
Yeah, it definitely sounds good.
Definitely sounds good. So there's another theory that says that Cyprianus didn't exist. So this is where I throw this in. During the reign of Decius of 250 of the Common Era, a renowned sorcerer and philosopher, Cyprian, lived in Antioch, who was a native of Carthage. There is another saint called Bishop Saint Cyprian of Carthage, and that is not the same one. They're both from that area, but they are not the same one. This is of Antioch, so just to kind of make that distinction. What we do know of Cyprian the magician and later Saint Cyprian comes from 3 different authors of 3 various texts originally written in Greek in 3 parts. So it's like conversion, confession, martyrdom. And during the latter part of the 4th century that it was written, and then you see it also appear in text from Russian Orthodoxy. So the 3 versions were put together in the middle of the 5th century, translated to a metric paraphrase, and published in 3 collective books, which talks about Cyprian's conversion to Christianity. The second one centered on Cyprian's repentance, and then the third one describes the famous martyrdom that both Cyprian and Justina underwent. So that gets me into the legend or the lore of what happened during the height of his sorcery and then his conversion.
Yo, you know what's wild is that thing, that sigil you have up on the end. I mean, isn't there like that's used again? You see how like the left and the right looks like a full cross again coming out. If you were to take that extra line and put it at the top and the bottom, I mean, like the OTO or like that was Crowley's used the signature very close to that.
Oh wow!
When they sent me the letter telling me I got kicked out of the fucking club, I got kicked out of the playhouse. This magical psyop. They signed their letter with pencil. You know, it wasn't typed. It was done in pencil. They wrote that not that sigil, but with one very close to it on the piece of paper that they mailed me to.
To me, it looks like the papal sigil almost. But
I mean, I think it's that.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure it's the same symbol that Crowley has signed shit with too, but it's very close to that.
So this sigil I found from people who use Cyprian as a way to do magic, not in the Christian sense, like praying to a patron saint or anything. This was more from a patron saint of magic with a K. And I found that and I put it in there. I was hoping you would say something because I looked at it and I tried looking it up and I was like, that, you know, I didn't know if it was something that was current or that was even in use or anything like that, but it was found associated with his name. And then obviously the Ordo Sancti Cypriani is like an actual order of the Saint Cyprian of Antioch, which I thought was weird because to me that looks like that what is it called? That cross with the three.
Oh, I can't think of the name of it.
I can't think of the name either. Yeah, it'll come to me after the show's done.
Yeah, of course.
For sure.
As soon as we hang up, you'll be like, oh, I remember.
Yeah, no, that's what it is. So the legend states that there's a literary tradition originally based on, like I said, 3 different versions and 3 different authors. So it went like this. A pagan lawyer, a rich man, was wanting to employ the services of Cyprian and his magic to seduce a woman by the name of Justina into marrying this pagan lawyer rich guy. So Cyprian attempts it the first time, and he sends Justina, a demon, to torment and arouse her carnal passions within her. However, because Justina was practicing strict piety, which was chastity, prayer, and fasting, the charms and spells of Cyprian that he cast had no effect on her. So Cyprian decides that he needs to send a stronger demon. This is the second attempt. He sends the chief of demons to Justina, and that demon was conquered by a certain sign of the cross, which is the Catholic sign of the cross. Brought to despair, Cyprian then also made the sign himself and was then freed from the toils or snares of Satan. And I think there's another legend that talks about, like, he didn't know what had happened, and so he gets the main chief guy to tell him what happened. And when he tells him, then Cyprian does it himself and then casts the demon away. Basically pissed off that, not even the chief guy could conquer a sign of cross. So at this point, Cyprian decides to convert to Christianity. He burns all his spell books and sorcery books in front of a bishop of the church, and then is made preeminent by miraculous gifts. And then he rises the ranks of within the church. So the image that I have here is the oldest known portrayal of the Theurgist that ties in all the key elements of those 3 books. And I believe it's 9th century is what they're claiming painting. And it is older than all the known manuscripts of the actual legend. So it kind of gives some credence to the legend itself. So in this painting, we see Cyprian in his home, in his pagan dress without a saintly halo. So this is pre-conversion. So to the right, we see the vessels containing magic scrolls, a grimoire, and the like. So you see a globe off to the left-hand side, which indicates scholarship. You see a demon or deity statue protecting Cyprian and his work up at the right-hand side, looking down at him. You also see Cyprian with his with 2 figures coming out of like a watery cauldron, and then a vessel full of magical papyri. And then on the left-hand side of the actual image, you see Justina, and I believe she's being protected by an actual God or Jesus or something like that, as was depicted. The description was depicted. So that was that image, and it's older than the legends have. So now that leads us to Cyprian has since converted, climbed the ranks of the church, and then during the Great Persecution, which just kind of give you a little brief background, it was the last most severe persecution of Christians by the Roman Empire. And I believe what had happened was the emperors at that time basically say that if you're not going to, honor the gods of the Romans, then you're going to be persecuted. And I think it started February 23rd of 303 of the Common Era. And it issued, basically saying Christians' rights were no longer, valid, and that they had to comply with universal sacrifice to all the gods. And if you didn't, then you were going to be persecuted severely. So during this time, the Great Persecution, both Cyprian and Justina were arrested and taken to Damascus and tortured. One of the torturing stories is that they put them in a cauldron and basically turned up the heat and started to try to boil them, but nothing happened to them. And because nothing happened to them, the people got really pissed off, and they went ahead and they took them out, and they didn't waver in their faith, and they were sent then to the emperor in Nicomedia, which is outside of Damascus. And at that point, that emperor was like off with their heads. So they were decapitated by the bank of the Gallus River. And their bodies laid unburied for 6 days. They were then taken, after 6 days, they were then taken by Christian sailors to Rome and then buried on the estate of Lady Rufina. and that there at the gravesite, many healings occurred. And then it wasn't until Constantinople, or the building of the Constantine Basilica, that they were actually unearthed and then removed and taken to the basilica and entombed there. And it was Constantinople that basically declared in honor of the feast day on September 26th of 379. So there's a lot of history with all of that for it to not exist. These pictures are really cool, I thought, to include. So Cyprian became recognized as a powerful saint, especially in Russian Orthodox and Roman Catholic countries, that he could break magic spells and enchantments. In a sort of paradox, Cyprian also became regarded as a patron saint of magicians and sorcerers in more modern times, with magical writings being attributed to his name. So in the Basilica or Biserica Zalătari in Bucharest, Romania, it is claimed that the incorrupt right hand of Cyprian is there in the reliquary. The belief states that touching it will remove spells and enchantments, attracting those believers concerned with magic. So in this actual basilica is the right hand of Cyprian, as claimed, and you can touch it. So, yeah.
Something up with that right arm, right? Remember how it was funny, even with the Twin Peaks and the guy missing the arm?
Exactly. Yeah. That's crazy. One thing that I thought was interesting is that, so their feast date appears in the general Roman calendar and the Roman Rite of the 13th century, and then in 1969 it's deleted for reasons that it lacked historical evidence. And then their names were completely removed altogether in 2011 of the Roman martyrdom list, which I thought was kind of weird, why they just remove it, but they did. So he's still considered a saint in many other countries, but in terms of the actual list, he's been removed. And so is Justina. So many grimoires have been written under the name Saint Cyprian, and while they cannot be attributed to him, like he didn't actually physically write them himself, these texts utilize his name as a method of adding legitimacy to the status, and not only because he's a saint recognized within the Catholic faith, but also as a patron saint of necromancers and divinators. The other thing is, a lot of at this time was a lot of oral tradition. So there's all that going on too, is that most of these people during this time, like when Saint Cyprian was practicing, they were practicing a lot of oral traditions. A lot of people were not writing things down. So I don't know how much of it is that it just wasn't written down, or even that it just didn't survive. And we'll see why later that maybe it didn't survive. So Cyprianus is basically a definition or description that exists for the term of a grimoire. And there's several other definitions for it, but we're just going to stick to this one for the sake of this presentation. So Cyprianus is a grimoire manuscript of spells combined with the magical tradition these spells form a part of, and was a general name or label given to a collection of spells. It was a common opinion at the time that these manuscripts referring to Cyprianus was associated with devoting oneself to Satan, or that it was a standard grimoire for summoning demons and spirits. Now, if a minister had a copy within his personal collection, it was alleged that he got it from a university. However, all these ministers, ironically, their wives, were also folk healers. So it was like, yeah, I guess so. I don't think so. But I think it was kind of like, it was like black market trade. That's what I think. Lore stated that these texts, the Cyprianus texts, were similar to other grimoires in that they were bound to its owner and they were hard to get rid of. They could not be destroyed by fire or water, and that discarding one would only result in the return to their owner. So there's 3 different types of books of Saint Cyprian. This is the first one we're going to talk about, is the Portuguese one. The Iberian Cyprian, which is made up by the Spanish and Portuguese editions, basically have the subtitle The Sorcerer's Treasure, and they contain text that is both Catholic and rooted in brujeria, or bruxeria, or I don't know how you say it, but in Portuguese. But this particular one is found to be particularly popular in Brazil. So, and this is the Portuguese Cyprian, and it's set within the Catholic framework. Sorcerer's Treasure draws up on divination, healing spells, getting in touch with the guardian angel, exorcism, locations of buried treasure, animal magnetism. So, so it goes into kind of all of that. And then the Portuguese one, it basically combines Iberian magical beliefs with traditional African religious beliefs, and they focus on crypto-Judaism versus witchcraft. So that's one of the distinction with the Portuguese version. Then you have the Spanish version of the Iberian Cyprianus, and that obviously written in Spanish, but a majority of those Spanish versions are similar to the Key of Solomon, and they're considered a rehash of the Grand Grimoire. So the most complete versions of the Spanish Cyprianus, which are called Libro Infernal, is a Grand Grimoire, a Key of Solomon, and the Grand et Petit Albert. So later editions, they have animal magnetism in it, cartomagnecy, hypnotism, spirituality, and the Black Poulet, which I think you mentioned that in a previous episode, where it's like the hen that lays a golden egg or something like that. So it has that in there as well. And it basically, teaches you about necromancy and Kabbalah and all that other stuff. So few of the Saint Cyprian books in Spanish exist, and we can thank the Spanish Inquisition tribunals for that, with most of them basically just being listed on the tribunal archives, but you can't find evidence of the actual books themselves, just that they were confiscated and potentially burned. And then it exists on a list somewhere that they had done that. So I don't think most of them survived that inquisitional moment. One of the things that I thought was pretty interesting, there's a town in Spain called Salamanca. It has a university, like one of the oldest universities in Europe. And there's a cave called Cueva de Salamanca. And it was a cave that served as a sacristy below the St. Cyprian Church. And the lore was that the devil taught black magic to the students of the Salamanca University. So Queen Isabella hears about this and orders its closure in the 1500s and definitively destroys it in 1580. It was like, no more. Like, this is not going to happen in my watch. But part of the sacristy survived, and it's still there today. And so you go back into a little bit of historical stuff, and Salamanca and Toledo are some of the most famous magical centers in Europe, and that those foundations basically were where everything spread out to the rest of the world, including Europe. I didn't know that Spain was that pivotal in the whole magical stage center. And then another thing, and I remembered this from something else, but in South America, the word Salamanca itself always refers to a cave where magic is practiced. So I thought that was pretty cool, how like you had that referencing back and forth. Okay, now on to the Welcome Cyprian, which I thought was very interesting. And this is the Latin manuscript of the Cyprian, basically called the Clavis Inferni, and it is the key of hell with white and black magic proven by Metatron. It's not related to the Iberian Cyprian, which is a Portuguese and Spanish one, and it's totally different. And it shows a correlation with the following literature, and I'm going to massacre these, so I apologize. The Heptameron, the Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's literature, the 6th and 7th books of Moses, Das Kloster Fosbuchen, Liber Lunae, Trithemius's Polygraphia, and the Magical Calendar. I know I butchered all of them. So the Key of Hell is a unique grimoire in that it discusses summoning and utilizing the 4 archangels and then their opposite numbers, which are the 4 demon kings. So the 4 archangels are Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel. And then the 4 demon kings, Paimon, Maimon, Egin, and Orions, are listed and depicted here. So the latter, the 4 demon kings, are shown in the Clavis Inferni with their animal and human forms, along with their sigils, which is a resource and unique resource among grimoires, right? That you can actually see what their sigils are. So I'm just going to briefly discuss this. So, like, Maimon is a black bird with, which is the king of. Let me see. I can't see it because the slide thing came up. But so it's the king of the something, and then you have the red-crowned winged
King of the South.
Okay, thank you. And then you have the red-crowned and winged serpent, which is the king of the East. Mm-hmm. And then the
Oh, what,
next
you got your
one-
thing minimized because you got 2 windows open?
No, because that where it says slide to comes out and it has the arrows and it won't yeah. But anyway, and now it disappeared. Thank you very much. Okay, so then now this let me go back. Yeah. Okay, so Egan is a black bear-like animal with a short tail. This is the king of the north. And then you have Paimon, which is a black cat-like animal with horns, long whiskers, and a tail, and is the king of the west. And one of the things that I mentioned to you, I thought that was very interesting. So here in Clavis Inferni, Paimon is the 9th spirit in the Goetia, right? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, it's in the Goetia, yeah.
Goetia. And
yeah,
it's depicted... Gotcha. And, okay. And so it says it has different spellings, either a Y or an I is the same. And that since it's depicted as a cat and it's the 9th spirit, I thought, 9 lives because of the cat. So.
Yeah, when you had told me that, I was like, what?
Yeah, I thought that was...
Because then that even brought me back to, like, Crowley's story with killing the cat to see how many lives it had.
Yes, that's what you were saying.
And I do question if a lot of his stories are actually occult stuff in its own.
Yeah, I think so.
Not that I'm trying to give the guy, like, a break on what people want to think about him. I just do question if some of his stories are even occult shit in itself.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so it shows some more depictions of, prayer and dragon eating a lizard, and like you have a gold plate of a page like with sigils all over it in Hebrew. And the rest of the book basically is a mixture of magical scripts in Greek, Hebrew, cipher, Latin, reverse Latin, and all kinds of different things. And it's said to basically show you how Cyprian was a mediator between paganism, Christianity, devils and angels. And it goes into the legend stating his story for the purpose to convey man's potential in magic. So that was it for him.
Okay, all right. And now we'll get into, maybe some people might think that this was a cheesy way out, especially if there's any people who have been studying this stuff for a long time. They probably have heard of this guy, and I knew who he was when I was doing my thing. So I was like, this is an easy one for me to cover. But we got St. Albert the Great, or Albertus Magnus. There we go. We got him up in the corner right there. I'll leave him up there. And as I go into some of his stuff, I'll move the slides. Albertus Magnus. It seems likely that Albert was born sometime before 1200, given evidence that he was aged over 80 on his death in 1280. 2 later sources say that Albert was about 87 on his death. That's what they're guessing, which has led to 1193 to be as commonly given as the date of Albert's death. That's Albert's birth. So that's funny, even 1193. We got some Janus symbolism there, some OTO symbolism. Albert was probably born in, now Bavaria, but it was called something else in the past. Albert was probably educated principally at the University of Padua, if I'm saying that right, where he received instruction in Aristotle's writings. It is said that Albertus may have had an encounter with the Blessed Virgin Mary, who convinced him to enter the Holy Orders. It's either in 1223 or 1229. He became a member of the Dominican Order and studied theology at Bologna and other places. Selected to fill the position of lecturer at Cologne, Germany, he taught for several years there, as well as Regensburg, Freiburg, Strasbourg, and Heidelstein. During his first tenure at lecturer at Cologne, Albert wrote his Summa de Bono after having a discussion with Philip the Chancellor concerning the transcendental properties of being.
Wow.
1245, Albert became master of theology under Guric of St. Quentin. After this, Albert was able to teach theology at the University of Paris as a full-time professor, holding the seat of the chair of theology at the College of St. James. During this time, Thomas Aquinas began to study under Albertus. That is another person I would have liked to have gotten into, but I just think maybe in a part 2, if we ever do a part 2.
Yeah.
That is somebody I would like to have covered as well, St. Thomas Aquinas, because basically his name just means Thomas from Aquino. I just find that very interesting. Aquino, Italy. We got Michael Aquino out there. Who knows if this is like, play on words here. But during this time, Thomas Aquinas began to study under Albertus. Albert was the first to comment on virtually all the writings of Aristotle, thus making them more accessible to have academic debates on. The study of Aristotle brought him to study and comment on the teaching of Muslim academics, notably Averroes and Avicenna. If I'm saying those correct. Sorry. In 1254, Albert was made provincial of the Dominican order. In 1260, Pope Alexander IV made him Bishop of Regensburg, which he resigned after 3 years. In 1263, Pope Urban V relieved him of the duties of bishop and asked him to preach the Eighth Crusade in German-speaking countries. After this, he was especially known for acting as a mediator between conflicting parties. In Cologne, he is known not only for being the founder of Germany's oldest university there, but also for the Big Verdict of 1258, which brought an end to the conflict between the citizens of Cologne and the archbishop. Among the last of his labors was the defense of the orthodoxy of his former pupil, Thomas Aquinas. And now he's saying defense. He was defending his occult ideas. I just was not getting into him enough, but St. Thomas of Aquinas was an occultist as well. And since he was an occultist, he was saying, yes, what he's saying is okay because he understood it. He was kind of like a sympathizer in a way. Yeah, an apologetist. Right. Albert was a scientist, philosopher, astrologer, theologian, spiritual writer, euchemist, and diplomat. Under the auspices of Humbert of Romans, Albert molded the curriculum of studies for all Dominican students. He introduced Aristotle to the classroom and probed the work of Neoplatonists such as Plotinus, however you say his name. After suffering a collapse of health in 1278, he died on the 15th of November in 1280 in the Dominican Covenant in Cologne, Germany. His relics are in Roman crypts of the Dominican St. Andrew's Church in Cologne. He was beatified in 1622. He was canonized and proclaimed a doctor of the Church on the 16th of December, 1931 by Pope Pius XI and patron saint of natural scientists in 1941. St. Albert's feast day is November 15th. Albert's writings, collected in 1899, went to 38 volumes. These displayed his prolific habits and encyclopedic knowledge on topics such as logic, theology, botany, geography, astronomy, astrology, mineralogy, alchemy, zoology, physiology, phrenology, justice, law, friendship, and love. He interpreted and systematized the whole of Aristotle's work, taken from the Latin translations, and notes of the Arabian commentators, and in accordance with the church doctrine, which I find that interesting. Mm-hmm. Is that the only way you were able to make translation? It's just interesting.
Exactly.
Most modern knowledge of Aristotle was preserved and presented by Albert. His principal theological works are a commentary in 3 volumes on the Book of the Sentences of Peter Lombard and the Summa Theologia in 2 volumes. He is credited with discovery of the element arsenic, and he experimented with photosensitive chemicals, including silver nitrate.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's, kind of impressive for somebody back then.
Yeah.
He did believe that stones had occult properties, as he related in his work, De Mineralibus. Albert was deeply interested in astronomy and has been articulated by scholars such as Paula Zambelli and Scott Hendricks. Find that interesting. So another occultist with the last name of Hendricks from a long time ago. Throughout the Middle Ages and well into early modern period, astrology was widely accepted by scientists and intellectuals who held the view that life on Earth is effectively a microcosm within the macrocosm. It was believed that the correspondence therefore exists between the two, and thus the celestial bodies follow patterns and cycles to those on Earth. With this worldview, it seemed reasonable to assert that astrology could be used to predict the probable future of a human being. Albert argued that an understanding of the celestial influences affecting us could help us to live our lives more in accord with Christian precepts. The most comprehensive statement of his astrological beliefs is to be found in the Speculum Astronomiae. However, details of these beliefs can be found in almost everything he wrote, from his early De Natura Bonae to his last work, Summa Theologiae. So I find that interesting, though, that like back then it was okay, like according to like a church or people want to get with the Bible, or you're not even supposed to be getting into astrology.
Yeah,
but
it
yeah,
was
but
okay
but
back
yeah,
then.
but yeah, if it was showing how the Bible was or this shit was correct, it's weird.
My
I don't know.
conspiracy says that I think they were making too many advancements, and they had to pull the plug on that.
I've thought that too. This, I think, is interesting before we get into something else with him. Natural law. Albert devoted the last tractatus of De Bono to a theory of justice and natural law. Albert places God as the pinnacle of justice and natural law. God legislates and divine authority is supreme. Up until his time, it was the only work specifically devoted to natural law written by a theologian or philosopher. So I just think that's kind of interesting too, the idea of natural law, where it may have came from.
Yeah.
The Grand Albert is a grimoire, and that's what we're going to get into now. You mentioned before the Petit Albert. This is supposed to be like the Grand Albert. That's actually supposed to be, I think, like possibly somebody kind of like condensed a smaller version of that book. It's questionable.
The Cliff Notes of the.
Yeah, it's just like it's questionable with the authenticity of that. And honestly, even with this, I know some people may debate this, but when you go to look it up, this is where it's listed. He is the author. The Grand Albert is a grimoire that has often been attributed to Albertus Magnus. Begun perhaps around 1245, it received its definite form in Latin around 1493, a French translation in 1500, and its most well-known French edition in 1703. Its original Latin title, way too long, but I will it ends up being The Book of Secrets of Albert the Great on the Virtues of Herbs, Stones, and Certain Animals. It is also known under the names of The Secrets of Albert, Secreta Alberti, and Experimenta Alberti. During the 19th century, this grimoire was widely circulated in France, where it was distributed on the streets in small paperback versions in the Bibliothèque Blue style. And I was like, what the hell is the Bibliothèque Blue style? So I had to look that up. Bibliothèque Blue is a term for a publishing scheme introduced in 1602 in Troyes by the brothers Jean and Nicholas Oudot, in association with the family of Claude Garnier, who had been the printer to the king. Oudot produced prints in low quality and small format, sold with a blue paper cover. These brochure-like products came to be known as blue books. That made me think Project Blue Book.
Oh my God.
Because I do believe all that shit's occultism and magic.
Wow.
The book contained instructions on how to summon spirits, demons, and other supernatural beings, as well as spells for various purposes such as healing, protection, and love. It also recommended herbal remedies and potions for common ailments, such as the use of theriac, a concoction made of serpent's flesh and opium, as a remedy for animal poisons. The Grand Albert's popularity was also partly due to its reputation for granting spiritual powers to its readers. Some believed that simply reading the book could result in demonic possession, while others saw it as a means of gaining supernatural abilities. According to the site that lists the grimoire, although just tales, many stories of incredible magic are attributed to Albertus Magnus. And we're going to get into something a little weird here, eventually. According to one tale, he once invited some guests, including William II, the Count of Holland, for dinner at his home on New Year's Day, 1249. The Count owned a piece of land which Albertus Magnus wanted to purchase for a monastery. The Count did not want to sell. When the guests arrived, they were astonished to see Albertus Magnus had set up a meal in the garden outdoors. Everything was covered with snow and the temperature was freezing. He assured them that everything would be all right. Despite their misgivings, the guests sat down to eat. As soon as they had done so, the snow melted, the sun came out, flowers burst into bloom, and birds flew about and sang. When the meal was over, the summery scene vanished, and the shivering guests had to go inside to warm by the fire. The impressed Count agreed to sell Albertus Magnus the land he wanted.
Oh, wow.
In another legend, Albertus Magnus, using natural magic and astrology, created a homunculus, which could talk and function as his servant.
What?
But its jabbering was so disturbing to Thomas Aquinas that Aquinas smashed it to pieces. Now, we're going to get back to that. We're going to get back to that, I promise. We're going to get back to that.
Wow.
But just real quick, we're going to get back to that. According to the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry and its kindred science comprising the whole range of art, science, and literature, as connected with the institution by Albert G. Mackey, which I find very interesting because when it comes to ghost hunting, everybody goes to Mackey's place. 33rd degree author of the History of Freemasonry, the Lexicon of Freemasonry, a textbook of Masonic jurisprudence, whatever, symbolism of Freemasonry. This is a book of Freemasonry that they have mentioned something about Albertus Magnus. Albertus Magnus, a scholastic philosopher of the Middle Ages of great erudition, but who had among the vulgar the reputation of being a magician. He was born in Leuengen in Swabia in 1205. As an illustrious family, his subtitle being that of Count of Bolstadt. He studied at Padua and in 1223 entered the Order of the Dominicans. I'm going to skip some of them. His writings were very voluminous. The edition published at Lyons in 1651 amounting to 21 large folio volumes. Albertus has been connected with the operative masonry of the Middle Ages because he has been supposed to many to have been the real inventor of the German Gothic style of architecture. Heideloff, in his Buite des, I can't even pronounce this, says as he recalled into life the symbolic language of the ancients, which had so long lain dormant, and adapted it to suit architectural forms. The Masons accepted his instructions and adopted in consequence the system of symbols which was secretly communicated only to the members of their own body and served even as a medium of intercommunication. It is inserted to have designed the plan for the construction of the Cathedral of Cologne and to have altered the constitution of the Masons and to have given to them a new set of laws. We're going to get into this now. An android is a humanoid, in case people don't know what an android is. An android is a humanoid robot or other artificial being, often made from a flesh-like material. Historically, androids were completely within the domain of science fiction and frequently seen in film and television, but advances in robot technology now allow the design of functional and realistic humanoid robots. Now, if you want to go to the Oxford English Dictionary, traces the earliest use as androidus. And the 1728 Cyclopedia in reference to an automaton that St. Albertus Magnus allegedly created. By the late 1700s, androidus, elaborate mechanical devices resembling humans, performing humans' activities, were displayed in exhibit halls. The term android appears in the U.S. patents as early as 1863 in reference to miniature human-like toy automatons. The term android was used in a more modern sense by the French author Augustus, whatever this name, Isle Adam, in his work Tomorrow's Eve in 1886.
Wow. And remember, they didn't start writing patents until the mid 1800s. So they couldn't, even if they did, they couldn't patent it, quote unquote, until then.
And then on Oxford, you have AI Narratives, a history of imaginative thinking about intelligent machines. In this chapter, we will examine a pre-modern instance of it in the form of a magical device that was reputed to have been created by the medieval philosopher Albertus Magnus, an artificial construct in the shape of a human body or a head that is animated for the purpose of divination. It is described as capable of speech and the use of the reason. The stories involving Albertus have been retold many times, from the first version in a 1373 work entitled Rosaria della Vita to the early modern era. The fantastic object has also been associated with such intellectual figures as Gerbert of Aurillac, who was Pope Sylvester from 944 to 1003, Robert Grosseteste from 1175 to 1253, and Roger Bacon, 1214 to 1292. And the reason I'm even getting into all that is those are other people that have also been known to actually have had androids or something like this.
That's crazy.
We will demonstrate the earliest narratives struggled with the question on whether Albertus was dealing in illicit knowledge in making the object, their authors ultimately defending his creation as a product of legitimate intellectual magic. When the story was retold from the 16th century onwards, new interpretations of the wonder alternatively secularized it as a purely mechanical device or demonized it as a work involving diabolical beings. And blah, blah, blah. So I thought that was interesting that I even found that.
That is crazy. I never heard that before.
Then I started going down a rabbit hole with that. And then we got Stephen Groger and Descartes' an intellectual biography. He is not the first philosopher reputed to have constructed a mechanical companion. Albertus Magnus was said to have had a robot that could move and greet visitors with the salutation salve, which means how are you? Thomas Aquinas, his pupil at the time, is reported to have attacked and broken the gregarious android when he came across it unexpectedly in the night. The story is reported with references I have not followed up in G.A. Lindeboom's Descartes and Medicine. Then again, published the May 1st, 1997 by Stephen Groger. Further, one should not forget that in the Middle Ages, there was a vivid interest in automatons. Albertus Magnus had in his laboratory at Cologne a robot that could move and give a greeting saying salve. There is a narrative that the inquisitive Thomas Aquinas once entered the laboratory during the night, but was so frightened by the unexpected welcome that he hit the robot so that it broke into pieces. Then in the book, move on. Then in this book, Het Leven van den H. Thomas van Aquino by J. Vincenz de Groot. I even found that interesting.
Groot. Yeah.
This is back from 1907. Another example of how popular imagination has made its discoveries with a lot of ingenuity and labor. Albertus is said to have made an automaton that clearly spoke the word salve. Now, the great master had, in addition to his study cell, a kind of a laboratory where he spent all days hammering and hammering that made many monks hesitant. And first off, I did translate this from, I think it was Dutch into English, so like may sound a little off, but it's because of the translation too. Thomas, who wanted to know what this mysterious work meant, once when the master was not there, he broke into the wonderful room. He sees strange animals, artistic tools, strange devices and glasses, and behind a scarlet curtain he sees a wonderful appearance that captivates his eyes with strong magic, and suddenly shouts "Salve" 3 times. In his fright, he hits the speaker, and automaton collapses. Albertus rushes over. He sees the devastation. Thomas, he shouts, "What have you done? You've ruined 30 years of my work." In Albertus Magnus, His Life and His Science by Dr. Joachim Sigart. In 1857, it is even quoted in here. We see from the passages that Albert really made use of such human figures in his physical studies and lectures. The legend that tells the Blessed Thomas met such an automaton in Albertus's room is by no means completely out of the blue. Based on these suggestions, it is very likely that Albert himself had made such a figure, which had to take a few steps and say the word "Salve," and was able to speak. By drawing the curtain that covered it, perhaps the entire mechanism came into motion, so that we can pretty much think of the legend as a historical fact.
Wow.
And we got another one real quick here. St. Thomas Aquinas and the Medieval Philosophy by Daniel Joseph Kennedy in 1919. Not going to read the whole thing, but he is pretty much saying the same thing. There is another book here that is even referring back to, supposedly, this happened. Leave that up on there. And then in this, the Cyclopedia Universal Dictionary, you see here that the word androidus. An automaton in figure of a man, which by virtue of certain springs, duly contrived, walks, speaks, etc. I think that says, see automaton. Then it says Albertus Magnus is recorded as having made an androidus. The word is compound of the Greek man and whatever they say for form. So it is putting man and form together from Greek.
Wow.
Yeah. And then there's just another whole thing in here too where it's talking about androids. Even talking about how when this was made or when they're made, some of them say that like certain parts of the body were made at certain, times with the zodiac. And going with planetary stuff, that's when you will make that certain body part. I just found it weird. I'm not going to read the whole thing off.
No, but that's interesting.
And then I thought this was interesting. I really can't, I'm not going to read too much of it because I can't see too much of it. But, an early day term of android used to describe human-like mechanical devices. This is from London Times, December 22nd, 1795. This is out of the newspaper from 1795. They are talking about an android the size of a 4-year-old child that will be an exhibit at 12:30 during the day, and then I think later on at 7:30 or some shit like that. But it's like an exhibit going on, put in the newspaper, December 22nd, 1795, talking about androids.
Damn.
I don't know what the hell is up with that. It's just weird to me.
What happened to them?
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of like schools and stuff. A number of schools have been named after Albert, including Albertus Magnus High School in Bardonia, New York, Albertus Magnus Lyceum in River Forest, Illinois, Albertus Magnus College in in New Haven, Connecticut, founded in 1925 and only 2 miles from Yale. Albertus Magnus Science Hall at Thomas Aquinas College, what a surprise. Of course, they got his boy in there. In Santa Paula, California, is named in honor of him. The central square at the campus of the University of Cologne features a statue of Albert and is named after him. The Academy for Science and Design in New Hampshire honored Albert by naming one of its 4 houses Magnus House. There's a whole bunch of other places. There's Albertus Magnus Gymnasium in Germany. So there's a bunch of places named after him.
That's really cool.
Yeah. All right, so there you go. Sorry.
Okay, I'll be quick. I know.
Don't rush.
No, that was really good. That automaton, yeah,
It's just weird.
it is. You almost wonder what happened to it. Where did it go? What was built on top of that? So I've got boring Saint Francis of Assisi. I'm just kidding. Saint Francis of Assisi was born in 1181 in Assisi, Italy, and he was an Italian mystic and Catholic friar who founded the Franciscans and is considered one of the most venerated figures in Christianity. He inspired to lead a life of poverty and traveling preacher, commonly portrayed wearing a brown habit with a rope tied around his waist featuring 3 knots that symbolize the 3 Franciscan vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. When Francis was born, he was born to a father of a silk merchant, and his mom was French, like a noble woman from Provence. And his parents indulged him. He lived a high-spirited life, typical of wealthy young man, and spent money lavishly. They described him as handsome, gallant, witty, intelligent, delighted fine clothes, and fascinated with all things of physical pleasure. Although hagiographers, which is biographers of saints, remarked about his bright clothing, rich friends, and love of pleasures, he displayed disillusionment toward the world that surrounded him early on in life. And this is kind of just demonstrated in the story of the beggar, where he was selling cloth and velvet in the marketplace on behalf of his father when a beggar came up to him, asked him for alms. And at the conclusion of the business deal, Francis abandoned his wares and ran after the beggar and gave him everything that was in his pockets. Of course, his father scolded him and his friends mocked him for doing such act. So Francis went through a series of visions that either occurred to him or to the people associated with him. And Francis, so the first one was Francis had been praying to God for guidance, and sometime after that, he had a dream or vision where God revealed to him a palace with military weapons and told Francis that the palace would be for him and his knights. So Francis interpreted this dream as a sign that he should join the military. And join the military he did in 1202. He joined the military expedition against Perugia, but taken prisoner at Collestrada. He spent a year captive and sick, causing him to reevaluate his life. However, upon his return to Assisi, Francis returned or resumed back to his carefree life a year later. Then at the age of 24, in 1205, Francis left for Apulia to enlist in the army of Walter III, Count of Brienne. Other stories say that Francis experienced a mystical vision of Jesus Christ in the country chapel of San Damiano, just outside of Assisi, in which the icon of Christ crucified said to him, "Francis, Francis, go to repair my church, which, as you can see, is falling into ruins." Francis interpreted this as to repair the ruined church that he was currently praying in. He sold some cloth from his father to assist the priest there. And then the priest, when he took it to the priest refused the alms because he felt that it was ill-gotten, and Francis threw the coins on the floor. So to avoid his father being upset with him, he ran away and hid in a cave for about a month. When he returned to town, hungry and dirty, he was dragged home by his father, beaten, bound, and locked in a small storeroom. His mom set him free when his dad had left for work, and he went ahead and went back to San Damiano, finding shelter from the officiating priest, and then began to basically the legal proceedings to, I guess, sever ties with his father. So he was going to renounce his father, his patrimony, and his inheritance altogether. So for the next couple of months and even a year, Francis wandered as a beggar and in the hills behind Assisi. And when he returned, he traversed the city begging for stones to restore the church of San Damiano. He then carried these stones back to the old chapel, set in place himself, and began to rebuild it. So over the course of 2 years, he basically rebuilt that church and so many other churches, and he gained a following. And with that following, he thought, well, let me go to the Pope and ask if we can create our whole new order. The Pope said no, and so he leaves. But then the Pope has a dream of Francis holding up the broken cathedral in Rome. So the Pope sends people to Francis and says, no, forget it. Yes, you can have your order. I'll grant it to you, what have you. So that was the first time that someone else had had a vision of him. And then obviously something good happened to Francis. During this time, Francis also would travel into outside of Assisi and seek solitude and isolate himself in a garden to pray. Friars back at the countryside then witnessed a fiery chariot vision with a globe of light and glanced at Francis miraculously present inside the apparition. So that was the first event of bilocation, because he was over at a garden praying, and yet they witnessed him in a chariot above where they were.
Yeah, that's like what's his face did that in the last Star Wars, didn't he?
Yes, what's his name? Luke Skywalker.
Yeah. It was like meditating but projecting himself.
Exactly. Another event of bilocation in Arles, France. Francis couldn't travel, and so he didn't. Yet, and it was for a meeting of the chapters or whatever of his order. Yet many friars in attendance in France, because he was back at Assisi, witnessed Francis present at the entrance of the room where they were all gathered. So multiple people saw Francis at the entrance of the room. So that was the second one. Francis and another friar were praying at a deserted church, and the companion fell into ecstasy and experienced a vision. Beautifully decorated thrones in heaven, and as soon as he wondered or thought who the throne belonged to, God answered to the companion, "This throne belonged to one of the fallen angels and is now reserved for Francis." So other mystical instances included Francis seeing devils over a city and then sending friars to cast those demons out. And he had told them to cast them out in the name of God, but the friars ended up casting them out in the name of Francis, and they left. So that was, show how powerful he was on that whole front. When Francis was 37 years of age, he traveled to Egypt Muslim territory to attempt to convert the Sultan and put an end to the conflict of the Fifth Crusade. As the Sultan heard the words of Francis, he softened his resolve. Apparently he was like really mean and angry. He softened his resolve and was eager to hear more of Francis's teaching. Francis offered to participate in the trials of fire to prove Francis's faith, but the Sultan refused due to fear of a revolt from his people if Francis were to survive the trials of fire. Ironically, the Sultan gained a profound admiration for Francis and became lifelong friends. So that was, I guess, like a sweet talker, whatnot. Often Francis would seek out solitude in order to experience deeper and more intense prayer. On a particular time, unknowingly, friars came upon Francis and witnessed an occurrence of ecstasy. Francis, suspended in air, hovering above ground, a shimmering cloud folded around him with a glow emanating from within him. Keeping in line with spending more time in secluded prayer, Francis would make hermitage, I guess like trips where he's by himself, but due to his failing health, had to be taken by donkey. This time, the owner of the donkey had grown weak, tired, and in need of water. Francis dismounted from the donkey and began to pray over a particular rock, and water miraculously sprang forth, and the man began to drink from it. In 1223, Francis arranged for the first live nativity scene as part of the annual Christmas celebration in Greco. Now, this is important because it kind of basically, or it's significant because it basically turns everything up on itself. He not only saw himself as part of creation, but his spirituality overturned the spirituality hierarchical ascent, in that it replaced it with the spirituality of descending solidarity between humans and creation. So instead of using creatures to ascend to God or whatever, he basically saw that you saw everything on earth as heaven. So he found God in all creatures, identifying with them as brother and sister, and finding heaven on earth. Legend exists that when Francis traveled to Bavagna, he came upon a large flock of different birds, and as he approached them, they all turned to face him. Francis then began speaking to the birds, and the birds in turn began to stretch their necks, stretch their wings, open their beaks, and gaze attentively towards Francis. Francis began to walk among them, and none stirred or flew away. Once he had finished his sermon of blessing the birds, they collectively altogether flew away. So Francis is associated with the patronage of animals and the environment, and is customary for churches to hold ceremonies blessing animals on his feast day of the 4th of October. That's, I guess, animal magnetism. or that's what it was qualified as. And then
I did not know that about him at all.
yeah, he apparently would talk to animals. That was like the whole lore, I guess, for me, was that he would talk to animals. He was able to speak to them and that they would listen, or they would turn to him and actually like listen to his sermons. And he was blessing them, or talking to them and blessing them and telling them they need to give praise for God and everything God has given them or whatever. And they would stick around. Apparently that was the lore.
What's interesting is that there are certain demons that if you render them under your control, you will have those abilities to communicate with.
Really?
Yeah.
Are they associated with being...
The Goetia, mostly. I know probably a bunch of them in the Goetia. You know, it all depends on how you're looking at it, too. You know, if you want to look at it as, like, aspects of the mind, you know, maybe these are certain gifts that are possible once you, like, render that not a problem.
I wonder how
anymore.
much of, like, telepathy
Yeah.
and communication with animals. I think animals communicate that way more so than, obviously, language. But... interesting. That's really, really cool. Yeah, I think that's super cool about him.
Or it's supposed to be like understanding like the bird's language and shit like that. Maybe stuff like that, yeah.
There's a thing, just real briefly, there's a thing called the morning chorus that if you go to an area where it overlooks the sun rising, all of the birds will start to sing together seconds, almost a minute before the sun rises, so that at the zenith of their call or calling to each other, the sun is actually breaking the horizon. I've witnessed it, and it's amazing. It's very amazing. It's almost like, how do they know? I mean, obviously they're outside every day, and so they but how do they know the sun is going to rise at that particular moment? Unless they can see the spectrum, and therefore they start calling. But the cardinal is the first one that starts calling first, and he starts calling about a good, I don't know, maybe 5-7 minutes before the breaking of the horizon. And then they all start calling to each other. And like I said, it gets loudest right as the sun rises, almost like they're greeting the sun. It's called the morning chorus. You'll have to look it up.
Just the fact
it's
that
pretty
the
interesting.
cardinal you're saying, I mean, that would make me question the word being used in religion. You know, or stuff like this. Like,
Yeah, it's true.
It was a references to that.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. That's true. Wow. Yeah. Okay, so in 1224, during another moment of prayer time and fasting, Francis began a series of visions. On day one of fasting, a seraph or seraphim approached him, and a vision of Jesus crucified appeared, folded within 2 of the 6 wings. As Francis thought about the vision, feeling both joy and sorrow, his hands and feet mysteriously began to take on the marks of the pains of the crucifixion, as well as a spear mark on his side. Francis had and would be the first to receive the stigmata, which is an affliction that others claimed he would try to keep hidden for the rest of his life. Francis died on October 3rd of 1226, and people continue to claim apparitions of Francis after his death. He was canonized by Pope Gregory on the 16th of July of 1228, and according to Christian tradition, he founded the Men's Order of the Friar Minor and the Third Order of St. Francis. So the stigmata, I think he was the first saint that was recognized to have the stigmata, which I always find super interesting that happens. In the same year of Francis receiving the stigmata, he wrote Canticle of the Sun, originally in Italian. It had been noted by scholars of it bearing occult traditions as related to alchemy and Hermeticism, with assigning gender to the elements and cardinal directions. Within the text, you hear brother wind, sister water, brother fire, sister mother earth. Air is masculine, associated with the east. Water is feminine, associated with the west. Fire is masculine, associated with the south. Earth is feminine, associated with the north. It goes on to say that the order in which they appear in the text is important because in the case of ceremonial rituals, you'll have to correct me on this, the order in which the elements or elemental forces are spoken or invoked is specific.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's the same exact way you mentioned that.
This is the same
Well,
order.
going by the elements, you'd have air, and then you'd have...
Yeah, and so in the text, this is the same order used by Francis in his Canticle of the Sun, east, west, south, north, forming a cross. Also, Francis uses the same gendering common in mystical traditions, such as the case with the sun and the moon, as well as referring to death as sister bodily death, which is connected to the feminine mother earth. And then this is the translation, the English translation of the Canticle by the Sun. And it also has a musical element to it that you're supposed to, I guess, play while you read, or say it, or read it out loud. St. Francis would correspond through letters to the orders during the formation establishment of his third order of St. Francis. These letters would then be collected and closely followed, the preachings and examples outlined there within, to later be developed into the rules of penance. These letters were translated into liturgical texts, which is this right here. And they just put it into a book. And then my final slide. So St. Francis is buried at the Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi in Assisi, Italy. Prior to his final resting place, the body of St. Francis had been hidden with claims of fearing theft of the body for relics. Apparently they loved relics. They loved hacking up bodies and taking them to different places. When the remains were found, unbeknownst to many, sealed into the basilica, the body contained the following items, which I thought this has to be something. 12 silver coins, 29 beads, a ring, a piece of iron, and a stone for Francis's head to rest on.
It's got to be, I think that's specific.
I think so too. What? I have no idea. But I mean, 12, 29, it couldn't be 30, it couldn't be 10, 15, you know,
the 12,
round
I
it
mean,
up,
I'd
round down.
automatically think like the Zodiac and shit
Right.
like that, but like the other stuff, I don't know. But
Yeah.
I'm sure it all has a reason.
I think so too, especially with that Canticle of the Sun. I had no idea that he had written that and that how symbolic it was for that. So
I even find it interesting, like the whole like thing that you just said before with the East and West, because as you were saying it, I was like, oh, that's like exactly what elements I'm facing.
yeah,
You know, and like you know, fire would obviously be masculine, and then water would be feminine. So like even the way you're explaining it matched.
yeah, and it's all to the sun, which is what you've told me, like in terms of
Well, see, that was even another thing. Like, if a lot of it has to do, I mean, if you got the sun right here, again with the cardinal, I mean, basically, you're telling me it's perception of the sun, the perception
Right.
of the sun is maybe by far better than others.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can see it a little bit faster, or you know what I'm getting? Like, they're actually better at perceiving the sun, and now we have people in a church that are supposedly, you know, I could
trying
see
to, yeah.
their
exactly.
perception and understanding of the sun might be more advanced than other birds.
Well, and it seems like the birds tower over their understanding of the sun better than we do, I think. I mean, at that point, but and that's all I got.
Awesome. That was great. It went probably about like 10, 15 minutes longer than I thought, but that was my fault.
Okay.
I had a lot of stuff.
You did, and it was really good. It was really interesting.
That's why
It
I
was
was
a
like,
lot.
originally we were going to go for 3 each. And I was like, you know what? I think 2 is enough. And if anything, we'll just do a part 2 one day.
Okay.
Yeah. But that was great. Thank you very, very much.
Of course, it was
That
really
fun.
interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting too. And like at one point, even, you know, when I was thinking about doing like a third person, remember at one point I think I was telling you, it's like I'm always almost confused of like who do you even pick, you know? And I was like, maybe I'll go with Aquinas just because he was associated with Albertus Magnus so much. But I mean, there were other ones, and you know, by far, I mean, you can find lists of them, you know. And I think it's rather interesting when you start seeing how many of these saints really were into this stuff, or, you know, alchemy, or you know, visions, or just, I mean, like Albertus Magnus. I mean, that was straight out an occultist, really. But
No, he was definitely like an MVP in terms of saints, for sure. All-time heavy hitter.
yeah,
I think so.
And I think part of it too that I find so interesting is that these ideas and these practices were accepted then.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And now they're not.
What happened?
I don't know.
Something fucking weird.
But the fact that they even had to relabel it mysticism, like, why not just stick with one word and call it what it is? I don't know.
And it's like, even if you start getting into people that have like kind of like set the stage for our understanding of the world around us, you look into their influences. It was occultists and magicians.
Absolutely.
They were looked at as the geniuses and the greats, and then like all of a sudden, I don't know.
And they were in every field, not only religion, but science, mathematics. I mean, yeah. So.
But yeah, and I think, I don't know if it'll be in like maybe not this week, or no, not next week, maybe the week after that. I don't know. Eventually we'll be doing another live. And I do think when we cover that person, you'll see even more about how an occultist may have actually influenced some people who were very influential on the rest of, I guess, history, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So kind of going along with the same idea. Thank you, everybody who jumped in the chat. That is what's up. There was a lot of people in there, a lot of people commenting. Other shows are in there. What the Flock, what's up? Thank you very much for stopping by, Paul. I always appreciate it. For people who are going to catch this live while it's up for a day or two, definitely check out the live chat. There's a lot of great comments in there. For people who even watch this after the fact when it drops, if you have a chance to watch the video, a lot of times I will try to put up some of the real good comments on the bottom so you can actually see like the conversation that's going on, because there's people in the chat that are adding to the topics. You know, it's just I don't have time to start digging into or start, acknowledging everyone, or this will turn into 3 hours. But definitely check out the chat and check out the comments that I'm throwing up. More tidbits of information, great stuff. That's why I love trying to go live with you all at least once a week. I appreciate it. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.